I'll say Telfight 3 is not high on the list of possible next
Correct.
things.
It's also not low on the list.
Yeah, it's not at the bottom of the list.
It's not on the list.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 487 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artist.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's September 27th, 22x4. And before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. We would also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep this podcast somewhat on the rails. Well, it's not okay. It's not really on the rails, but it's adjacent, rail adjacent, and we appreciate it. So a lot of stuff has happened in this past week. Namely, Sam created life.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so let's just talk about that.
Yeah, it was a process.
You're a double dad now.
Yeah, I'm a double dad. Welcome to new little baby into the fam. And it's been weird because, of course, Crashlands has taken like 4 years and some change at this point, which is one way to look at it.
A lot of things can happen in 4 years.
Yeah. The other is the studio's family network has produced 4 babies in that time span.
Well, and even shorter than that, the last year and a half.
Yeah, it's the last year and a half actually.
Yeah, right. So,
which is nuts. That's really crazy. So it's been great. The baby's healthy. Mama's healthy. I think I'm pretty healthy. So, we're firing all the cylinders.
You're looking healthy.
Thanks. A little tired, but other than that, it's pretty good.
Yeah. And
I think what was interesting about it this time around is the second time around is different because it's almost like Diana was actually talking about it. My wife, she said, the first time you had a game that got featured, right? Biggest, craziest thing. First game you make, even like a game jam. You're like, wow.
Whoa.
Unreal. Right. I did a thing.
I'll remember this forever. It just changes everything.
Mm-hmm. You do it again and there's different things about it, right? That you pick up on.
It makes me think of this, that I can't remember what the line is from, but it's for you, it was the most memorable, most important day of your life. But to me, it was Tuesday.
Right. And so the thing is it's interesting with the second kid because since we actually know what the fuck is happening, right? We're not so panicked, just Googling shit all the time. Yeah. Then one, we're way more prepared just for the whole duration of pregnancy, everything. So Diana had generally a better time. And then even in the post situation, again, it still retains its strange primal magic, in the sort of in the delivery process. Absolutely wondrous. And seeing this baby pop out is weird, weird and cool. But then when it comes to the taking care of part, the first time around, we were so again, you're so wrapped up in all the details and trying to figure out it's the same thing doing a game jam. You're how do I put fucking sprites in a folder? How does any of this work? And then
everything is on fire and everything is a panic.
Yeah. Versus, this time we actually got to kind of enjoy it and focus on it's the higher level experience of it, right? Focus on
it's the fluency versus non-fluency problem, right? Because when you have fluency, you get to just do stuff. Just kind of happens, and you get to think about it, and you get to kind of choose what you're thinking about. Versus when you don't have fluency, you don't know what to think about, but you have to be thinking about everything, and everything.
Everything feels
decision. You're making a million decisions all the time, and
So it's kind of in your first game jam. All you can think about is how fucking awesome and crazy it is that you're making this game, and you're just totally zoned in. On your second game jam, after you're there for a while, you're it really smells like BO here.
Exactly. You notice things.
I mean, the game part's pretty cool, but it's really crowded and hot, and it's very sweaty in this room.
Yeah, and I think the thing is with the with baby care, the reality is you're doing that. Our first child is 19 months at this point, and so the reality of baby care is it's kind of the same thing, but slowly changing for a long time, right? It's we did the newborn phase, and that's it's a long fucking. It feels long. It's actually not long in total time, but a couple of months of just very intense stuff. And so part of it then too is it's the difference there is it's essentially if you did a game jam every day in terms of just the daily aspect of it, the daily grind. And so it really has been the case. We've been able to kind of I guess sit on that slightly higher level, more abstract view of it and just enjoy it a little more because the like you said, Adam, the fluency is there. So even though even though the novelty around like the shift from 0 to 1, right, is a bigger shift than 1 to 2 in terms of kids, in terms of game launches, whatever, anything you're doing. The fluency aspect makes it so you get to pay attention to like different stuff and in a lot of ways have a better time, you know, or at least a less panicked time perhaps than the first time around. So it's really good. And the only thing that was kind of, well, very sort of mishappy about the whole thing was the hospital stay. I'm not going to go to like a lot of the details, but in short, like no one was on the level, you know, doing what they needed to do. They didn't have a bed for us. So we started off in like a recovery, like a post anesthesia recovery
Sam,
room.
a bed is just a floor that's higher than the rest of the floor.
Yeah.
Just go on the floor.
Honestly, it sort of felt like that. Like I was like, are we doing like an at-home birth here with spectators? Like what the fuck is happening? So that was kind of fucking intense. And
why was it just like overcrowded? What was the?
It was a combination of things where basically they didn't have the bed space. The result of that then was like a cascade of nonsense where essentially the start of Diana's like really intense active labor phase was it's almost like a random room, basically, I guess, but they didn't have the stuff. Right. Didn't have IVs.
It's a slack problem. This is also why like
COVID
created such a cascading failure in the medical system, right?
Yes.
Because all the hospitals, like the number of beds they have and the number of staff they have and the resources, all that, and all their systems that then revolve around, like, because like things are room based in a hospital, right? They're like, you go to this room and accomplish these things. It has this stuff in it, whatever, right? And like when COVID just caused way more people to be in the hospital than normal, and there's not a place for all of them. And now most of them have COVID, but there's still all the other people who are just like getting the normal kind of sicknesses that the thing is designed for, right? Then like you end up with this cascading set of failures where every single part of it breaks down because you're well beyond this. Because like everything is trying to maintain just enough slack. And of course, because of how fucked up our systems are, it's all based on how much money they can make. They maintain the slimmest the
slimmest margin as possible. Yeah.
So that I guess they can do it as cheaply as possible.
Yeah. So what I think about is like they were out of margin by the time we arrived. And
it could have been for any random reason at all, you know, because
it sounded like essentially what it was like it actually was random, which is they said the week before they had like basically no babies the week before and basically all of them waited until like basically the day before we got there. And then it was just, they were just slammed. So the result of that though was basically a delivery experience that was completely different from our first one. Where the first one we felt very taken care of. I felt like as far as my role, the role of like the dad in this context, I was able to basically participate in that overall process in a way that was very like opt in a sense of like, I don't need to, I know my wife's going to be totally safe and fine and she's being coached and everything. Like I get to participate in a way that assists with that. But like if
it's not up to you, it's not responsible for
it. This literally felt like the opposite where it was like, if I'm not doing stuff, then like,
they would have just thrown her into a broom closet.
So, like, what the fuck is happening here? And so it was that was just a lot more intense and not fun. And I've got like just a whole rap sheet of nonsense that happened that I'll probably be sending over to them because it was frankly insane. And if that happened to be our first one, and if anything happened to actually go wrong, which I think did, right? Thankfully, but like that's exactly the scenario where if something went wrong, you're talking like intense, like traumatizing of a person from that. The psychological experience of that was already just primed to like, if something went sideways, wow, going to be like the worst fucking time you've ever had, right? So I'm very, very grateful that it didn't go that way. I'm very annoyed with the people we trusted for it, but you know, that's how it goes sometimes. But I did want to mention that because I think in the context of then like family raising, right? Pregnancy's interesting and a challenge. Giving birth, insane challenge, right? Taking care of a newborn in particular is like the next one. And then it kind of like gradually it shifts and it's challenging in other ways, but it, you know, from a physicality standpoint, it's not as hard as the kids become toddlers and stuff like that. You're just dealing with like an annoying person now.
You don't have to carry them around everywhere. They can walk now.
Yeah.
You know?
Or I guess I still
they
kind
can
of
feed themselves or, you know,
they can help
eventually.
Out, right? Or they can at least communicate their needs. But what's interesting about that is that, you know, afterwards, my wife was like, I think I'm good. Like, I think I'm done. I think 2's probably good because I don't really want to do that again. Right. But when she said that, which specifically was talking, was that delivery process, like the risk of that delivery process going that way.
Imagine imagine providing such bad service in your business that you prevent a person from existing in the world.
That's kind of what it was. Yeah. And I was like, that's an interesting one. That's really interesting. But I do think it's worth mentioning that a lot of times when people talk about, like before the podcast, we're chatting a little bit about this, and like when you talk about this process of like making a kid, like child rearing and pregnancy and all that, a lot of the really visceral focus is on those physical aspects of like carrying, like how hard the pregnancy might be, how hard like that delivery might be, right? The staying up late, whatever. But what's really weird about it, and I think this has been my wife's experience as well, is that like the reality of like having a kid means that what you're actually, the design pillar that everyone is like into is this like having a kid aspect. And so you have all of these things that are not fun, right? But they fall within this category of like this acceptable jank that we talk about. I'm going to turn this into a design thing. So
yeah,
the abstract, like the high level thing that you're doing, right, is interesting enough, is important enough, matters enough, resonates enough on an emotional level that a lot of this bullshit kind of fades, and especially over time, it fades away, right? You remember, and this is always the joke with people, it's like always right after delivery, people are like, I'm never going to have another kid.
And then a month later, they're like, we should have another.
Yeah, a few months later, once things are like evened out, you're like, that's, seems like it was worth it.
Well, and also, but like the permanent aspects of it, the baby, the thing you brought home with you and is bringing so much joy into your life and a lot of stress, obviously, but but a lot of meaning into your life, right? Then like that continues to generate more and more positive memories, right? That will kind of like crowd out the one bad day that you had,
Yeah. And so what I think is interesting though is that like, you talk about then this particular juncture where you're depending on like this medical system, right? In this case for us, where that acceptable jank threshold can actually be kind of pushed too far. And people have this, of course, with any part of this process. So in our case, it happened to be this external entity. Some people have like a pregnancy they're just like throwing up the whole time. Not fucking fun, right? So like there's all sorts of parts of it that can go above and beyond. But the fact that for us, it was like, I don't know how to put it. It had nothing to do with the kid or the pregnancy.
Oh, it's the part that should have been the easiest because it was.
That's what I'm good at. Yeah, thank you.
It was being handled by professionals who've trained for a decade to handle this. And in your case, it wasn't anything. There was nothing abnormal about it. It was like a fully typical, like best case scenario kind of medical scenario. And so it should have been the case that the experience with the healthcare system to like finish the process, right? That should have been unnoticeable.
Yes.
It should have been effectively irrelevant to positive. Like that's the range of experiences that it should have been. And when that's what it should have, because like a lot of the nightmare stories are because like something also is like really medically complicated or wrong or bad or dangerous or something, right? And that no matter how successfully the medical system handles that, there's still an enormously traumatic experience. There's no way around that, right? But having good medical care, even in the most traumatic case, is such an enormous improvement over what would have otherwise been. And having the case that you can have a completely like typical, normal, non-traumatic, otherwise medical experience from the biological side that gets turned into a traumatic experience by the system whose, again, whole purpose.
His whole purpose is this thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that's so frustrating, right? And so I think...
do you feel like, because you're talking about how, you've been through this before. So like the first time you did it, you were pretty freaked out.
Oh, yeah.
And everything was a big deal. So obviously, like you come into the hospital and you're putting out a vibe. You're putting out some nervous energy, where you're like, oh, yeah, what do we do? This is scary, right? Second time you come in and you're like, yeah, this is fine, right? Do you feel like maybe there was some subtle response to the fact like you guys seemed like you knew what was going on? I think so. They just kind of.
I think what's interesting about that is actually
left you alone.
I think that as far as like how Diana were behaving in this one, it was actually way more intense. Like our orientation toward what was happening was way more intense than it was the first time around.
Well, because you would know what to ask.
So you were more engaged this time.
Actually, way more engaged. And then sort of like I think to your point though, there's a framing inside of the medical system, which is that if it's basically any birth beyond the first one is easier, which is
so they just don't throw as many resources at a
which is the thing is like it is typically true, and like the babies come faster, the body's already done a bunch of work, right? The first time around to like make all this possible. And so it is true that typically the labor is considerably shorter, like, but there's basically
but not always.
not always. And then like the problem I have with it is
even
like,
if it is,
it's still fucking intense, right?
Yeah.
So, do your job. But then also the thing that it basically seemed like it gave them license to do was to essentially like not fucking fully not ask questions or like investigate anything. Basically not listen to what we were saying about stuff. And so it turns out that maybe there's actually sunny side up, which basically means that they're not breech. Breech is where they're coming out ass first, which is like really rough, right? Usually get a C-section for that. Sunny side up is just, I guess, instead of coming out face down, which is how the head is shaped, the pelvis is shaped, everything is shaped like maybe sockets into like gets shot out, right? If they come in up, like face up, sunny side up, which is how this baby had been born. It's not that key and lock shit is not happening.
Now it's like the baby's face is like gonna like smash against the pelvic bone.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. All sorts of stuff going on where it's like this is it's a much harder. It's essentially like delivering as if the baby's a pound heavier. Like it's like that's how much more stress it is on the system. So they didn't know that this was happening, which is insane because like again.
That's one of the things they're supposed to know.
Yeah, they're like they just kept being like every time someone would come in, they'd be like, "Wow, that's interesting. It's taken a long time."
They're like, "Hey, can you guys wrap it up?"
Yeah, they're like, "This is really taking a long time. Baby should be out. Should be out any minute now." And Dinah's like, "Yeah, but it's not." And they're like, "Yep, let's just keep on pushing."
Anyway, bye.
It was that sort of shit where like again, we're pushing on them the whole time about whatever we're thinking about, but I don't know. I don't have the deep medical knowledge about stuff. I have enough fluency in like the overall medical establishment to know that even when you really trust a doctor or whatever else, you should always be verifying the stuff that you think is like the information about how this works with what's happening. You should always be advocating for yourself not because people are like purposely malicious or whatever else, but in a big system with complicated shit. When I was getting my cancer treatments and stuff, there's occasional times where they try to inject me with medicine that I'm literally allergic to. Like it says, like, do not put this in this man. And they'd pull it out, start working on it. And I'd be like, is that this? And they're like, oh, fuck. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, it's it's one of those, like, it's never acceptable that kind of thing happens or almost happens. Mm-hmm. But there's an understandable bit to it because, like you're saying, you're very aware of what you're allergic to, right?
Yes.
When a physician is looking over your sheet, especially like a cancer context, where your sheet or your
it's
book,
a lot of info.
You're an enormous stack of information about your medical history. Yep. There's so much stuff in there. They just came from seeing somebody else. They're trying to be like, okay, I got to reorient, try to remember like what's going on with this person. They're trying to skim it and get the quick picture. Yes. And this is all in the context of our piece of shit garbage medical system that is profit driven, right? So that
a little bit of slack, right? No slack, right?
There's
so you
no
got 2 minutes before
they
you
don't have
got to cut those costs.
Yeah, so they have like no time to do it, and this is why these kinds of things happen, even in the best case scenarios under our system, even with the best doctors under our system. So yeah, you just absolutely have to do this for your business. It's the thing I always wondered though, like hearing Sam's story of all the cancer shit he had to deal with, and then this like garbage tier delivery scenario, and these sorts of things where I'm like, Sam has via himself and through his family has more medical knowledge about how the whole system works and just about how like biology works,
navigate it,
all this kind of stuff.
I got a lot of fluency.
Anybody, right? Yeah. High fluency in that domain. In the first percentile kind of a thing, or whichever direction it goes, 99th percentile, whatever the fuck, the end of the spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. And
he is the 1%.
Yeah. And
unfortunately.
And the amount of then like error or near errors or real errors, or just bad experiences you were able to like identify and then circumnavigate or deal with in some way because you're actually aware of that. Mm-hmm. Like think about how many of those things that you experienced and saw that the other 99% of people who don't have that level of fluency
100%
wouldn't know. They wouldn't know that happened.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, that's I think that's the thing that's always bothersome about it because you're looking at this and you're like, this is not, it's a systemic problem. Whenever you're like, even when you're like the statistical point who's experiencing this thing, like there's so many deliveries happening in there right now, right? That like, I was like, I know not everyone's having a great time. There's no way. So if I'm not having a good time and I'm seeing this tremendous stack of small errors, there is no fucking way that everybody who's in here is being treated in a way that like feels great, right? And like, again, simple example to Adam, to your point about fluency. We're in there. Diana's like actively laboring. We don't have the epidural in yet. So she's like in quite a bit of pain. And been about a half hour or so. And these contractions are rolling in like every fucking minute or two, right? And they last about a minute. So Diana's like really going through it. And I look over and I find him just like, can someone put a blood pressure cuff on her and get her vitals, please? Like,
right.
Why has no one?
You mean step one?
Step one. Why has no one gotten vitals on my wife? You guys have been doing all sorts of stuff. Why the fuck do we not have blood pressure? Like, why do we not have?
Nothing's being monitored.
Yeah. Here. I was like, she's going through a lot. We need to make sure that she's fine. And they're like, oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
right,
if you don't know,
our job.
Yeah, if you don't know that, like the very first thing, the thing that oftentimes stops you from making like tremendous errors downstream is fucking putting a cuff and getting vitals on someone. Then, yeah, it's sort of you're not paying attention to it because it doesn't seem like you should be paying attention to it because why should that be your job?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's also the case that like to handle slack in cases like this, hospitals rely on contract workers, so they'll have like nurses or doctors or whatever who they don't work at the hospital full time. They migrate from hospital to hospital whenever there's an uptick in demand and the hospital has no space or like they don't have enough staff to cover. They'll bring in these contract workers who aren't really that familiar with the hospital. They don't have any long-standing relationship with the patients. They're just doing a job, right? Yeah. They just come in, they get paid like, 3 or 4 times the normal.
That was a weird thing too, though. Everybody who we had, no one was new. Like it didn't seem like we had anybody who was like cycling in, didn't know what's going on. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of just weird shit going on where I was like, so I think all to say that like, basically one, being a double dad is dope. Diana did a tremendous job with the delivery. And frankly, the two of us, I feel like got through that whole thing together. We got through it very intact. And then like I made sure that her hospital stay afterwards, we got out of there as soon as you could, which was 30 hours from like the moment the baby came out. We were like, we're getting discharged at 30 hours. And they're like, I don't know about that. We're like, get your fucking papers in order. Get us out of here, please.
The hospital was like, if you stay for another night, we can charge you $15,000.
Basically.
Like, I don't think I will.
But like, really made sure that when she was staying there that then it didn't feel like that. Right. When we were in a much more calm setting. So like we managed to get through that whole fucking thing very well, I would say, like on the other side of it. Deeply frustrating. And one of those things that, again, like as far as acceptable jank goes.
Unacceptable jank.
Really unacceptable jank. Really unacceptable jank. That kind of is dumb that anybody would have to experience that. So for anybody who's, got the kids and has had experienced some delivery or labor bullshit coming from the medical side of things, I feel for you because goddamn, why?
Yep.
It's so silly.
And it's a constant reminder to everybody listening that anytime you have the opportunity to vote against for-profit healthcare in some fashion or another, do that because it's one of the most evil systems we have, and we're built upon evil systems. So like.
I've got a fun healthcare system story from this past week and a half.
Let me say one last thing before we jump off the topic, which is I do want to mention we did a bunch of reading on like how to make sure that the toddler we have would be into the baby. Okay, and this is always one of the concerns.
You don't want a death match.
You don't, because like the toddler's going to win. And and like one of our neighbors,
it's a weight class thing.
It is a weight class thing. One of our neighbors down the street, like their kids. Their firstborn's a couple of like maybe 6 months or a year older, and like would just like walk up and slap the baby in the face. Be like just like not into the baby at all, and just like terrorizing it on occasion whenever she could have the opportunity. So we're like, oh God, we're gonna have this stress in the house. So we read up on it, and the funniest thing was they're like, all you do, or like not all you do, but one of the best tricks is when you bring the baby in, you give the toddler a gift that the baby got for the toddler. You say, oh yeah, so the baby got you this stuffed animal, and the toddler's like,
because Tyler doesn't have enough of a sense of how the world works to be like, what? Babies can't buy.
Exactly. And so we did this with our firstborn, and she's been so great. She's been absolutely sweet.
What did she get?
Loves it.
What the baby
she got? A little stuffed plushy dog,
nice.
Stuffed animal, and yeah, she just like carries the thing around. Loves on it, and then she just loves seeing the baby, and it's great.
Hey, bribery works.
It works.
I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, at least for toddlers, definitely works for toddlers. But yeah, back to what you were saying.
So for those of our listeners who are not in the U.S., our people talk about our healthcare system as being like a big problem. The actual like anchor point of the problems in our healthcare system is the financial system that underlies the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. It's like how we pay for stuff. That's the real problem.
That's true. Yeah,
it's for profit which is already corrupting, but then
mediated by for-profit insurance companies as well.
Yeah, who are allowed to be monopolies. So the extent of corruption within the inherently corrupt for-profit system is so wide and deep and never-ending that the whole system is just
like you ever see like an advertisement from IHOP where they've got a stack of pancakes like 20 layers high. It's like that, except instead of 20 layers of pancakes, it's just 20 layers of fucked up middlemen stealing your money everywhere, right? So one of the things that I've been trying to do this year, because I'm 37, I'm getting closer to 40, and
stay on top of it, baby.
Get ahead of it, you know? So like I've got to I'm trying to like get a primary care physician and like one that I actually like. And I've cycled through a lot of primary care physicians in St. Louis because they keep leaving. Like I'll get a doctor and I'll be like, all right, I'll see you in a year. And then when I'm about to go for my next appointment, they're not there anymore. They've moved to some other practice because they paid more, right? Because
the longest I've had one in St. Louis so far has been 2 years.
Yeah, because it's all private and they're all independent hospitals. It's not like there's one giant, government-run hospital system that pays a standard wage. Hospitals are competing with each other for staff, and so they're always sniping each other's workers and stuff. So it's very difficult to get any kind of long-term care. And all
hospitals are shitty work environments. So for
everybody's
doctors.
trying to get
so
out.
doctors are like, oh, maybe if I go somewhere else, it'll be better, and then it's not.
It's not. So they just leave again. Especially like in a big city where like when we were growing up in a small town, it was the only hospital for like a 45-minute drive in any direction, right? And so they did still cycle through doctors, but not really at that high of a rate, right? Because if you wanted to work at a different hospital, you had to move to like a different part of the state.
We had the same family doctors our whole lives. Lives, basically. Yeah.
But in St. Louis, there's just hospitals on hospitals. Everywhere you go, there's hospitals, right? And so any doctor can just jump to a different hospital, and they're just 3 blocks away from where they were. They can even just
go one floor below and are somehow
and it's a different hospital system. Yeah. And so this year I'm like, all right, I'm doing it. And so I look up a bunch of different doctors, and I find one that's really highly rated and has been at this practice for like a decade, and I'm like, yes, someone with some fucking longevity, So I got to sign up and they're like, oh yeah, well, it is a 6-month wait to establish a new primary care doctor. We can't just like get you in, but once you're in our system, then appointments are more like,
which is typically true because it's also a slack problem for people who've been there for a long time because they have a full patient load. So
exactly. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yep.
So I wait the 6 months and I go in and I get my checkup and everything's fine. I do blood work and then I come back a month later to go over the blood work. And we talk about that. And then at the end of the appointment, she's like, all right, great. Well, we'll see you next year. I was like, cool. And so then as she's walking out the door, she stops and she goes, oh, actually, you know what? And in my mind, I'm like, what? And she goes, yeah, I'm leaving this practice next month. So you're going to need to find a new doctor. And I'm like, oh my fucking God.
Did she say where she was going? Did she like...
Well, no, because like because again, it's all private shit. So they have all kinds of bullshit rules about like, you can't like take your clients because we're clients, we're not patients or whatever, right?
And your clients have the hospital group.
Yeah, the hospital owns the relationship between me and the doctor.
And it's easy to like put this on the doctor's plates, but they're
just responding to the system.
The system, and the system
they're at the bottom of the pile.
Our dad's was a surgeon his whole life. My wife was in medicine, going through that process for a long time.
Mom's a lot of the people, cardiac nurse.
So a lot of the people that I know today are like physicians like roughly my age in the hospital systems right now. And every experience they've ever described about working in that context sounds like the biggest nightmare.
Yeah. They're the ones it's being any worker in any place like this, right? Like any large system where it's like if you're the one actually doing the work and producing the value, then there's going to be 20 people above you who are all trying to make sure that you get as little as possible for doing all of that stuff, right? They want to siphon everything off, right? And so she tells me this. I'm like, okay, so what do I do, right? Because do I need to wait 6 more months now to get another new doctor, or like now that I'm in this hospital system,
Right.
you know,
Can you just move? Is there someone next door? Yeah.
Yeah. And so she's like, yeah, so they'll send you a notice in like a month on how to like transition over to a different doctor. I'm like, okay. So wait a month, and then I get this message. I start the process. I start like looking around. And then 3 days later, I get another message through their web system saying, hey, everybody, just want to let you know that we will, as an entire hospital system, we will no longer be supporting your insurance in the state of Missouri.
Oh, my God.
So, and it's a big hospital system. And they're like, the thing is that this insurance company is increasingly refusing to cover things that our doctors know are medically necessary for the health and safety of our patients.
That's the other thing for people not from the U.S. is our insurance companies are allowed to practice medicine.
So the doctors have to ask the insurance companies whether they will cover stuff, and the insurance companies
they can say no,
who are for profit, meaning like the less money they give out, the higher their profits are.
I have actually a great little tidbit on this, which is yesterday I got a letter in the mail from our insurance, Anthem, and they were like, yeah, we're just not going to cover the first day of this hospital stay that your wife just had.
Yeah, they just tell you you're paying them to do this.
I was
and
like,
they just don't.
Yes, you are. So, anyways, I'm getting that solved, but like you have to argue with it. Oftentimes they
make
just,
everything into a battle.
Yeah, they'll reject everything.
Yeah. That's literally their business model: is you give us money and we will refuse to give it back when you need it. That's
they recently got in trouble because it was found that I can't remember which one it was, but they're again it's a handful of monopolies basically. And one of them was they had put high incentives on people rejecting claims. And there was like a proportion you had to reject. And they also had like an AI tool that would just auto reject things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so they got in a lot of trouble for this, of course. But like they're getting in trouble by our extremely corrupt political class, right? Who are also dumb as fucking rocks. So then people try to explain what's going on.
I would say it's a big enough problem that like
it's just
I don't know. It's just like
it's tentacles and everything.
Problem.
Right?
Yeah.
It's because of course, like if you look at donations to like congressional campaigns, blah blah, like the health insurance companies are always right there at the top, right? Like there's so much money being put into keeping things this way because it's very profitable to be a company where everybody has to give you money or they'll die, and then you promise them you'll give it back, and then you just don't, right? Like that's a very profitable business model.
I do. The thing is, I do kind of like that your hospital was like, you know what? Fuck these guys.
Yeah.
I mean, they end up fucking you over, but like, I mean, they have to, because they have to pay their people, and the thing is, the hospitals get paid by the insurance company primarily.
And how is the hospital CEO going to get his yacht if the insurance company doesn't pay up?
That's true.
That's right. Yeah.
It's like every part of like I can't really feel for the hospital system. I feel for the physicians and I feel for patients, but hospital systems, throw them into the fucking ocean. Insurance companies, throw them deep into the deepest pits of hell.
I think insurance companies are the crux of the problem. They are the problem.
They're what I mean. I think another example is like with Obamacare, right? One of the stipulations that I had at the time.
Well, people call it the Affordable Care Act, not that they like it. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, it's not affordable though. So
it's not. It's not. Yeah.
So the Affordable Care Act. So they had one of the things they did was they capped and they said like, okay, even though you're a for-profit insurance company, you have to spend at least 20% of your revenue, at least 80% of your revenue on actual healthcare, right? But you know what you can do to make that 20% of the pie bigger is just make healthcare more expensive, right? Yep. So that was then
you can have higher revenue, and then the whole
yeah. So because if the overall pie is bigger and you're only taking 20%, so basically that's what happened is insurance companies were incentivized to increase the cost of healthcare, say no to more things and all this kind of stuff, and then because they can, as long as they can make the overall costs really big, then they can just
annoying like I'm not touching you sort of bullshit on a corporate, because Apple just did this in the EU with their like the fucking app store changes for third-party apps stuff, where they're like, well, we technically allow it. And it's like, you just, it is like dealing with children, but like really powerful.
They'll always find a way
to
weasel their way out of the rules.
Yeah, I do really appreciate the EU for that reason. Like, of course, every government organization's got its, problems, right? But their absolute unwillingness to entertain corporate bullshit is just so deeply satisfying. And actually even our current FTC, it's like doing all these like anti-monopoly things, and it's doing, not as much as we all want, of course, right? But it's for the first time in literal decades, like doing stuff. And I don't know if you guys have seen, like they have this recent, like they're really slapping around AI companies who are just, lying about the services they're providing and stuff. So they just like took over stewardship of like 4 big AI like focused companies that are claiming to be accomplishing things that they're not. Yeah. They're actually like, so, and every time I start seeing these things, I'm like, fuck yes, please. I want more. It's like the one thing that I'm actually like pumped about with the current administration we have is like, they actually like said, hey, FTC, we're going to let you do your fucking job of like reining in all this horrible, corporate practices.
Again, it's kind of like
every time I see that in the EU, every time I see that rarely in the US, it's just, I'm like, yes, for the love of God,
more
rein this shit in.
It's the same idea as like a medical thing where it's like, if you go to a hospital, you should feel like you're being taken care of. People give a shit.
That's what you're paying.
Right? That's what you're paying for. That's what the whole point is, right? And the same thing to me, like with the government stuff. The ideal is that they're making it easier for you to have a good time in your life, and they're stopping people from being assholes and taking stuff from you. That's supposed to be.
That's what we're paying them for. That's what that's what taxes are. Yeah. We're paying them to do the job of making our lives easier.
You're Adam. It is great when every so often you see some stuff and you're like, thank you for actually doing your fucking job. This sounds so crazy, but
why is it so fucking hard to do your job?
Yeah.
Well, it's not hard. It's just less profitable.
It's easier by not doing it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into some questions, or maybe a question.
Some questions.
This question comes from our listener over at podcast.bscotch.net.
We have one listener who asks this question, periodically.
Yeah. Highest upvoted question today comes from Daneisquadrobest. It's kind of it's tough. It's a tough one.
Sure.
It's all in one word. All right. Do you guys have any plans or ideas for what you'll work on once you're completely done with everything for Crashlands 2? Mm-hmm. If Crashlands 2 is successful enough that you won't need to worry about money for the foreseeable future, is there anything like Tower Fight 3 that you guys have wanted to make for a while but didn't think would be a wise business decision because of worries about its success?
I'll say Tower Fight 3 is not high on the list of possible next things.
It's also not low on the list.
Yeah, it's not at the bottom of the list.
It's not on the list.
That's fair.
Yeah. If there's a list that the game is not on it, I would say
it's list adjacent.
Yeah. There are many things. So, and there's sort of 2 parts of this. One is if Crashlands 2 is a blockbuster, we don't have to worry about money again. That's one set of then what would we do, right? Mm-hmm. And the other one is just assuming it goes fine, but we're still on the treadmill, and we got to figure out the next thing. But we're not feeling an urgent pinch. We just have to figure out the next thing. Mm-hmm. I think for the case where things go fine, but not like explosive, then we're going to launch the game. We're going to have to put out at least one content update. Mm-hmm. We don't know what that's going to be yet, but that'll be like the next thing we have to work on. And we have spent all of this time investing into our ability to build a game like Crashlands 2 through like the game change that we talked about a lot on the podcast, through our art pipelines, through all of our personnel, and all of it, stuff they've learned over the time, and all. So it's so much investment, that kind of stuff, that it won't necessarily be Crashlands 3, right? But we want to make sure we leverage all that shit that we invested so heavily into to like at least do something else, right? That's going to be probably
it's like adjacent.
It's going to be a Crashlands thing, probably, right?
Well, I'd say even if it's not like Crashlands IP, if that makes sense. If you were to, it's almost like Bloodborne versus Dark Souls. You know what I mean? Like it's
same like, genre, same kind of style.
Leverage, because like the reality is the reason that this dev cycle took so fucking long is you have to understand. Like,
half of it was tools dev.
It's not even tools dev, because like I mean that is a big piece of it, but like the reality is the complete transformation of the studio during this project. I mean, like top to fucking bottom, right? Mm-hmm. And then back up again is like very intense, and is actually what we essentially used Crashlands 2 as our like transformation mechanism, right? And I think what everyone feels is like we want to take a lot of the stuff that we got from that, and without having to do another insane like turn yourself into liquid caterpillar goo so you can become a beautiful butterfly. Like maybe we're just a butterfly now. We can fly around, have a good time, And so I think
just one game,
just one time. And so I think what we've talked about is just regardless of like what the specifics of like say particulars of like the feel of it or the IP of it, it will leverage a bunch of the stuff that we already have.
Yeah, we want to try to lean on our stack and all of our tools rather than being like, oh, multiplayer time now, so let's go fucking learn how to do that. Or 3D time now. Like we don't want to do our new game engine time. You know, like we don't want to do any of that. We want to just.
I've pivoted hard into like I used to be very into the idea of making an MMO as like the kind of like the final.
Like
the
final
boss thing of like of game dev.
Yep.
But now even like as I've grown older and wiser and played a lot of online games, I realized like the hardest part of games really is the players because they're very demanding. Right, like
it's hard to get them in the first place, and then once you have them, they're hard in a new way. Right,
you can't please them forever. Like you know, they won't be satisfied with the same thing. They always need something new. And we always laughed because like when we were doing the early access stuff with Levelhead, it was like every week we had a patch for quite a while. Yeah. It was like 6 months. We had a weekly patch that like added some new content or like entire new.
I think it was like it was like 2 months of weekly, and then like 2 months of every other week, and then like another 2 months of like a month or something like that. Yeah, but it was like very frequent updates.
And the thing that like we had never done that kind of an update cycle before, and the thing that just like set my mind reeling was every time we put out a patch, the response was always just, "What about X?" Right. Yeah. It was like 1% of the people were like, cool. And then that was the end of it. Right. But like almost everybody were like, great. Now, how about you do more work though on something else that I care about? Right?
Which again is like, and there's an understandable bit of this as a player, right? Like definitely because when you get the new thing, it makes you think about all the other things that you hadn't thought about before.
Yeah. It's a sign of interest.
Yeah, it's not negative, but it is definitely as a developer experienced negatively because you're like, God damn it, I just finished something cool.
Can we just wait till tomorrow for the demands? Yeah. So like as I've been playing the new WoW expansion has come out, which I've been having a great time with, but it's been so wild to be seeing like conversations that are happening on like Reddit or on Twitter, which I don't look at Twitter, but like people in my guild do.
Like screenshots
then they keep sending me bullshit from Twitter.
Again, it's the whole idea of like every social media is just screenshots of all the other social media, you know, so.
That's funny.
And so like.
Too true. Actually.
It was so weird because like I've just been having a great time with everything going on in the game. I feel like it's really well. There's quite a few bugs because I think they kind of rushed it out the door. But even with that, it's very well put together and it's super fun. And
they hit the high points. Right?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the best iterations of the game that it's been. But you wouldn't know it if you spend any time on these communities because everything is garbage. Nothing works. The company is shit. Everything is shit. The community is toxic, you know, and it's just like.
Yeah, you probably don't want to make it an online game if you want to have a good time. I think
because players just make each other miserable.
Yeah, it's what they
like they could otherwise be enjoying stuff, but as soon as they start talking to other players, then suddenly they're having a bad time. And it's just so wild.
Yeah, I think I would say single player definitely. At most it would be like a local co-op situation if we wanted to.
Yeah, but even local, I don't know. At this point, I think like even though like I love the idea of local co-op.
I'm not saying I even want to do it. I'm saying like
I think the reality is like it's actually such a nich.
But that's the question though, because the question is really just like if you were going to make just like the game that you wanted to make, that you would find super fun to make, regardless of whether or not there would actually really be an audience for it. Like. What?
Yeah, because now that's on the other side. That's if Crashlands 2 is a blockbuster, and we're like, cool, we can just do whatever we want to instead of whatever we think we have to, right?
Yeah, I think actually, weirdly enough, even in that case, a lot of the stuff we talk about internally would kind of be the same. Like I think the reality is like again the transformation process. Transformation is both hard and very energy. Like I don't say draining, but it takes. I mean, it just takes a lot out of you. You know, doing like this insane amount of work behind the work that people actually.
But I think even outside of like the amount of work, to me, it's actually the time. Like as in like the fact that it's been 4 years since we launched a game.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we've been just working on it. We've been telling people about Crashlands 2 because we started talking about it on the podcast like 3 years ago, right? We didn't announce it until a year ago, like publicly, but we were already talking about it 2 years. So we've been telling people what we're up to, right? For years. And like people finally got to take a glimpse of it 3 years in when we put the demo out, right? But that's still not the whole game. Almost nobody actually gives a shit about demos, really, right? So like, it doesn't actually kind of matter that we did that. And so still, it's like we got to get the game out for it to actually like for all the work that we put in. And again, for me, it's like mostly it's just the time for all that time to like pay off.
I think we want a shorter cycle. I think for me personally, I want something that has less complexity in it, and I don't mean that in terms of depth. So don't mishear this. But the reality, as far as like putting Crashlands together, because it's got a crafting system baked in with the questing system, with like how all of that, there's a reason nobody else builds a fucking game that looks like this, I guess is the short of it. Nobody else builds a game that has like such an intense crafting thing going on and this story aspect happening simultaneously. And the reason is because it is so
very hard
to tie all of these pieces together. And we do this progression flow stuff where like we're building a new chunk of the game and so we build out some new resources, decide what the components are for those. And then once you have those components decided, you can say, okay, where are the weapons going to be coming in this overall flow of like players' access to them? How do we gate other parts of the components coming from them? What are compounds that players are going to build, which are just components again? And how does
this all tie into the fucking story, which has to stand on its own and just be good as a story, but in a way that doesn't.
And deliver like content in a way that kind of like sometimes blocks it, so we can fucking know what's happening at certain points. Like, I would love to build something that is like, give me something just without that piece just one.
Without crafting?
Without crafting, honestly. Or like,
I think that's probably the big thing.
Yeah, or if it's crafting like a dumb one, like a simple system that everybody else uses, where they're like,
or one wood without the interaction or the deep interaction with story, you know. So because you can think like a cozy game where it's like you're basically like building a base and doing farming, so that's the focus, right? So that you think of like Stardew Valley, right, which isn't a simple game. But the complexity of the interactions is very different, right? Because it's like relationship focused rather than they're like not all story.
They're not all intermingling so hard. Yeah, versus like
there's not a main through line like full storyline.
Yeah,
that's like the core.
And even
think like ending. Quadrupus Rampage 2, you know, like purely action adventure with. Like if it basically follows the model version of Quadrupus Rampage, the lightest touch of story, which is like there's a boss that comes and pesters you, you know.
But you got to punch him in the face.
You got to punch him.
The story is fuck that guy.
Yeah, the story is fuck that guy, and you're just diving and fighting stuff, and it's a roguelike. And
so I think for me that's on the design that's what I would look forward to a lot. It would make actually being able to build the game just so much simpler as far as like
my personal pick, which is not at all saying that's what we're going to do, because I think it's really is my personal pick, but is Quadrupus Rampage 2, because it is still one of my favorite things that we've made. And it's also our most popular title still by just sheer number of downloads. It has like, because I was tying it up so I could like send some stats to some people.
Is that true if you include Crashlands Pirates?
Not if you include Crashlands Pirates. Yeah. If you include Crashlands Pirates, Crashlands is still
because on that metric I would include Crashlands Pirates because Quadrupus Rampage is free. Yep. So it's like, all right, the free players of Crashlands far outnumber the free players of Quadrupus Rampage, actually.
Mm-hmm. And that is true, but we're talking about non-Crashlands games though as the next game. So
that's true.
So, but in terms of like non-piracy, okay, that's. Download numbers don't mean that much. It's hard. There's context and nuance, blah, blah. Okay. But like Quadrupus Rampage has, what was it? I tallied it up. It's like 4.5 million downloads or 5 million downloads, something like that, across the 2 stores that it's on. And still to this day has an install base just on like Google Play alone, because it's the only one I looked at, of like 50,000 people. Right? Like 50,000 people.
We launched it 11 years ago?
Yeah.
11 years ago.
Yeah. So fucking long ago. And like and every once in a while, every like year, I'll like boot it up again and be like, oh, and it's just as fun every single time I pick it up. It's just so good. So like
every now and then I forget that game, the main character of that game does prominently feature a round red naked ass.
Yeah. He's got a hilarious little butt.
Little butt cheeks.
Technically, but it's a weird octopus, guys.
Did we ever have censorship mode? I remember we talked about having it where you could have a little like bar appear.
We talked about it.
But it somehow made it even dirtier.
Yeah,
like,
it made it worse.
Bar, it was like, what's back there? I don't even know what's going back there or in front of there. You know, that was the other concern. But I think it's one of those like the thing that I like to envision is like if we take one of our simple
prior games, you know, like Daneisquadrobest Rampage is like the one. And we said, what if we took our current studio power and like applied it to that? Not to make
just went turbo mode on this.
But just still like treated it for what it was. In the same way that we took Crashlands 2 off of Crashlands, right? Mm-hmm. It's like it's the same game, just really everything is in turbo mode, right? And like if we did that with like a Quadrobest Rampage, what could we make? You know, and how cool and you know.
I think I'm kind of on the same page with that. I mainly want like some design simplicity as far as how all the parts fit together, and then I don't know. After making Crashlands 2, I think part of it is that I'm much more focused on like that high level vibe and like mood of the thing, and so I want to whatever we pick to do, I want it to just be like, you know, like you see a really good really good like zombie game or something like that, and it's just like it feels it just feels like so spooky and cool, or like I was playing V Rising, you know, vampire shit, like anything where they pick like a good theme and it's like like you just feel it in all of it. Helldivers,
Helldivers is still like I don't play it that much anymore, but I have a few friends who are playing it fairly regularly, and every once in a while I jump in. And every single time I've gotten in my dropship and headed to the planet, and you're just coming in, like the music starts going, and like you're just like the engines are flaring, and you're like trying to choose your little target space, but you have almost no control over really what happens. And that whole fucking just like moment of entering the gameplay experience every single time is just thematically fucking perfect. Yeah. Every single, even just like when you come in on a planet, you like zoom in, you appear there, and there's all these other ships. You can see them shooting their drop pods down.
It's so fucking cool.
It's just so good.
So I think whatever we do next, I want to have, because part of it is like the sheer complexity present in like in interleaving all of Crashlands 2's oftentimes contradictory systems, right? So we talk about how like crafting / open world stuff, meshing it with story in a way that doesn't blow itself up as a challenge and whatever. Interleaving all those is so much work and so intense, and having enough design slack then to like put a bit more juice and effort into something that is like really like tightly thematically just cool as fuck and delivers on something much more like that kind of Helldivers-y level of just the whole thing start to finish just delivers on some like
just a vibe
fantasy, like some higher level thing. So I don't really give a shit what it is. That's what I want to do. You know what I mean? Yeah. So we'll figure that out.
I've got two games that I think would be fun and would be fun to make, but nobody would play.
Look at this. This is if we had infinite money.
This is infinite money.
Yeah, if we had infinite money. Yeah. So one of them is, you guys remember Startopia?
Yes.
It's like a space. That one, but it's like a space station simulator game.
Is it the space station ring one?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I loved that game back in the day, where it was like you were like an administrator of a space station, and I think it was like a broken down space station that you were trying to like rebuild and repair. So you start with like a section of it that had atmosphere and stuff like that, and there was like a space port. And, you know, aliens would dock with the station, and then you would, like, some of them would be tourists and some of them would be business people, you know, whatever. So, I haven't really played or seen anything like that since.
I think there's a new one that just came out that is like sort of almost like a spiritual successor to. I can't remember what it's called, but I'm pretty sure I saw it a couple weeks ago.
But like, I want to do that, but I want to do like a bureau shipping space station.
Bureau shipping stuff would be pretty.
We're kind of like you're like a franchise owner, right? And you've decided to open up a bureau shipping distribution center or something like
FedEx,
that, right?
Basically.
Yeah, you're running like a FedEx warehouse in space, right? And so you come in there, and of course, like kind of in that same vein where it's like
you could bring that to like the overcooked kind of side of things too, if you wanted to, you know? Like,
like you could probably still be a character, like you'd be like an administrator, like walking around, you know. But like the idea of like having a whole game where you are part of like the corporate management, and everything could be so fucking like tongue in cheek about just mocking like corporate culture, you know? And of course, like line must go up, right? Like we would design the game in such a way as to just like really highlight the absurdity of like cost cutting and layoffs and like all this dumb shit, you know? But like, I think that would be kind of like hilarious and fun to make. But I feel like once you put a game in space, that already cuts out a lot of people. Right, because for every reason, some people are just like, "Oh, space, right? That's sci-fi or something like that."
Well, it's actually because the focus on space is like
space is inherently boring. Because
space is boring. You have to pick the thing that's in the space that has to be interesting. So if you're talking about like running a FedEx in space, it's like, is running a FedEx a thing that would be dope and hilarious? Like maybe,
I
don't know, Yeah.
So there's that. It's like that would be one thing I would like to do is like a space business, like a space station business simulator. And then the other is also space. And again, like these are why I'm like, we wouldn't really make these because nobody will fucking play them. So you got like Elite Dangerous or No Man's Sky or these games where like you're like a pilot, I guess, and you're like flying from planets. That never really made sense to me because like spaceships are complicated and they need a crew, you know? So to me, a game like FTL is more accurate to kind of like having a spaceship and having the spaceship kind of be like the focal point of the game where you have a bunch of people on the ship and they're your crew and they have like different skills and stuff like that, right? So think like Star Trek, right? Like they have like 1,000 people on the ship or whatever.
Yeah, that's so the idea of like sell from a high fantasy standpoint, you know.
Yeah. So the idea of like a game where you're managing a crew like that, and like the management of like the crew and the ship is kind of like the central focal point, as opposed to like you just being by yourself and landing on a planet and just getting out and then just like being a person on a planet. It'd be more about like you would still be going like to space stations and landing on planets and like running missions, whatever that might look like. But so much of it would be more about kind of like in The Sims, how your sim has to go to work, to get some money. But the whole point is actually like building up your house.
Oh,
and, like,
I got
managing
you.
the
So almost
family,
more like a Guardians of the Galaxy sort of vibe, where you got your little weird crew of weirdos and you're doing space jobs.
Yeah, like you're doing the jobs not for the jobs. The jobs may even not even be a thing that you do. It may just be something that kind of happens, right? Like to get some money or whatever. And the real game is about like crew management, like
That's
building up the ship, building up the space, having like entertainment and like expanding cargo holds so you can do different types of missions, like blah, blah, blah.
But it's basically the interaction between like, it's like the ship, the whole crew as like one organism, then interacting with this vibrant interstellar space.
Yeah, because to me, it's like it kind of like what you're saying, space is empty, right? And so like imagine if you are a crew, or think about like even like a pirate game, like with sailors, right? Like they dock at a port, they're there for like a day or two because they need to like do some stuff and
get all sorts of
supplies, whatever,
all sorts of mischief.
Yeah, and then most of the time they're now just out on the water. Right. And it's just the crew in this ship and like whatever decisions they made and whatever stuff they did when they were docked, those things are kind of locked in for that journey. And then whatever comes on that journey, hopefully they were prepared for it. They've got it because you're now like locked in. Right.
From a gameplay perspective, what would it be like? Because FTL is combat oriented. Right.
Yeah.
So it's got,
so there could potentially be like these kinds of combat things where you'd have to have some kind of a view like that. But just that idea of like, and even like a reading, like there's that book by, I think it's by Scott Kelly, the astronaut who lived in the space station for a year. I always get Scott and Mark Kelly confused because they're identical twins, but whichever one isn't the Arizona, is he the governor of Arizona?
I remember.
One of them? Yeah, anyways, there's these astronaut twins, and one of them lived in the space station for a year. And he wrote a book about it, and it's fascinating because like they're literally just living in a space station. They're not like visiting aliens. They're not like flying around. They're just trying to exist in space, right? And just the sheer number of fucked up things they have to try to figure out how to do. Like, for example, they've got to exercise for 2 hours a day. Otherwise, they'll probably just die because their bodies and bones and muscles will atrophy so much that they'll just kind of decompose. Well, how do you exercise?
That's also while they're in space, but they eventually have to be back on 1G.
Yeah, and they don't want to be crushed into a paste, right? So like you need to maintain your strength. And so like, well, how do you do that? Well, you got to like strap into a treadmill with a bungee cord that's constantly pulling you down toward the treadmill so you can run. But then like, depending on how you run, you accidentally can create these like wobbles in the space station. And there's like this one particular astronaut who had to learn how to run in a different way because his gait was threatening to tear apart the space station because of the way these there's just all this weird shit that like just being in space has all these really wild, difficult things going on that you don't even need aliens to get involved for it to be interesting.
Well, I think the problem is like I think you kind of I think it's true in some ways. Those are interesting things.
I'm saying you still should because it's cool, but there's enough cool stuff you could also have like as the foundational layer of like challenges.
You're saying it doesn't have to be about the aliens because just dealing
it's really about just like being in space is hard.
Yeah.
It's just hard, you know? And games don't really ever.
I will say just physically, everything I've ever heard about being in space makes me just be like, fuck no.
Fuck that place.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Okay?
We're not supposed to be there. It's worse than the ocean.
Yeah. Your eyeballs get long. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Stop it.
Well, and like,
the
fucking mucus in your sinuses, which is normally, it's designed to be gravity drained, right? Just is floating now.
It stays there.
It
doesn't drain.
there.
So you just always are congested in space.
Always.
I hate it. I hate it.
Yeah.
And if you see astronauts, you'll see how like they'll have like a forehead vein kind of popping, you know, because it's like also like just the way that your blood moves through your body is different. And so like normally with gravity, your blood pressure in your head is lower because gravity's pulling the blood down, right?
Every stage of our evolutionary trajectory has been on a planet with gravity. Right?
Yeah.
For everything that makes us the living creatures that we are, every fucking step was at 1G. And then we're like, let's go live in space for a year without.
I mean, one of the things in this book, again, read this book. It's crazy. It's called Endurance. They tried to solve my head is constantly congested and my veins are bulging out of my face problem with vacuum pants, where like you would put these pants on and then they would suck the air out of the pants to create a low pressure system around your legs, which would then kind of like
suck the blood
encourage
down.
the blood, which did work, you know, but wearing the pants like was so uncomfortable and caused so many other problems that they couldn't really do it in a sustained kind of a way.
Yeah, really you just need some kind of a detached centrifuge or something so you can just like once a day, like do your 2 hours of exercise and then go over to the little centrifuge and just spin yourself really hard to put all the blood like in the right spots.
You need a spinning space station.
I mean, ideally you have just a whole ass spinning space station, but in the absence of that, you need a little centrifuge, you know.
Then even trying to imagine like how do you get a dock with a spinning space station? You would have to dock with like the center hub of the wheel, right? Yeah. And then your ship, as you're docking with it, would have to spin in a way that matches. Yep. And so, you would have to like, it's already hard to do that without having to spin. And now you have to spin. So anyways, I feel like this is why I love the show The Expanse, because so many of the things that happen in there are just because space is fucked up. Mm-hmm. And like that's a driving point in the show. And I want to see more of that in games. So that's my game I would make that nobody would play.
Love it, huh?
Yeah. And that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost it up the charts for the launch, and we would appreciate it. So thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.